Sometimes there are stories that the world doesn't know about, but the story will leave you in shock and fear of traveling. It was told to me by an old friend, so listen. It was nearly midnight when I finally clocked out. The diner had been dead for hours, but my boss, old man Rick, insisted I stay till closing just in case a miracle customer wandered in. Of course, none did. I grabbed my keys, pulled my hoodie tight against the biting October air, and headed to my car, the only one left in the cracked, flickering-lit parking lot. The drive home was supposed to be simple, 30 minutes down I-82, through a couple of sleepy towns, then the back roads that cut straight to my apartment. I'd driven it 100 times. But tonight felt off. Maybe it was how empty the highway was. Or maybe it was how my headlights barely cut through the dense mist rolling in. Either way, I kept one hand on the wheel, the other gripping a gas station coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, hoping the caffeine would fight off the creeping exhaustion. That's when I saw the sign. Detour ahead, Route 17 closed. The hell? I didn't remember seeing anything about construction. But sure enough, a set of orange barricades loomed ahead, forcing me off the main drag. I clicked my blinker, veering onto a narrow, barely lit road I didn't recognize. My GPS immediately freaked out, recalculating, before losing signal completely. Figures. The new road was rough, cracked with weeds pushing through the pavement, the kind of place that felt forgotten. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches clawing toward the road like they wanted to pull me in. I turned the radio down, hyper-aware of how isolated I was now. No cars. No lights. Just me in the dark. About 10 minutes in, I noticed headlights behind me. Far back. At first, I was relieved, not alone anymore. But as the minutes ticked by, something gnawed at me. The car behind me never got closer. Never backed off either. It just kept the same distance, its twin beams hovering like eyes in the dark. I told myself I was being paranoid. Probably just another poor soul forced onto this weird detour. But then the road narrowed again, dipping into a tree-lined curve. I slowed down, and that's when I noticed it. The car slowed down too. Exact same speed. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening on the wheel. My pulse thumped louder than the static-laced radio. I tapped the brakes just to see. The car behind me tapped theirs too. Not a coincidence. This was deliberate. A cold, sinking feeling pulled in my gut as I accelerated, heart racing now. The other car responded in kind, its headlights flaring brighter as it picked up speed. That's when I realized. Whoever was back there. They were following me. I hit the gas. The tires screeched for a split second before gripping the uneven road, launching me forward. Trees blurred past on either side, my headlights barely keeping up as I tore through the darkness. But the other car kept pace. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Those damn headlights were closer now, glaring white and too aggressive, like they wanted to push me off the road. Shit, I muttered, my hands slick on the steering wheel. I didn't know these back roads. No GPS, no cell signal, and whoever was behind me, they knew exactly what they were doing. The road twisted hard left. I yanked the wheel, the tires slipping for a moment on loose gravel before I caught control again. The other car took the turn perfectly, no hesitation, no skidding. They'd driven this road before. I spotted a break in the trees up ahead, a dirt turnoff leading into what looked like an old logging path. No lights, no markers. But it was something. I didn't think. I just did it. I killed my headlights and cranked the wheel, shooting onto the dirt path. Branches scraped the side of my car with a metallic shriek as I plunged into the trees, gravel spitting out from under the tires. For a moment, just a moment, everything was silent. I cut the engine, sat there, listened. The hum of the other car grew louder, closer, then roared past the turnoff, its headlights blazing down the main road, completely missing me. I exhaled, hands shaking, chest tight like it was bound with wire. But then, crunch, a single, deliberate crack of gravel under tires. Behind me, I twisted in my seat. Another set of headlights flared to life, deep in the trees. A second car. They'd boxed me in. The second car's headlights snapped on like a trap springing shut. They weren't bright, not like the first set. These were dull, yellowish, flickering a little, like whoever was in there didn't want to be seen until it was too late. My heart hammered in my throat as I twisted the key, restarting the engine with a guttural cough. Gravel spat from the tires as I threw the car into reverse, nearly slamming into a tree as I overcorrected. The second car didn't rush me. It just sat there, its headlights steady, waiting, like it knew there was nowhere for me to go. But there was. Between us, a narrow path snaked deeper into the woods, barely wide enough for my car. It wasn't a road, more like a trail, but it was the only option I had. I didn't hesitate. The undercarriage groaned as I drove over rocks and branches, the headlights cutting through the dense woods in erratic flashes. My tires bumped and jolted over uneven ground, each impact rattling my bones. Behind me, the second car followed, slow but steady, keeping its distance like it didn't need to rush. They knew these woods. They'd done this before. Low branches clawed at the roof of my car, the metallic scraping sounding too much like nails on a coffin lid. I floored it, but the trail kept twisting and narrowing, hemming me in. Every so often, I caught glimpses of the car's headlights behind me through gaps in the trees, always there, always following, never losing ground. I reached a fork in the trail, left looked tighter, with low-hanging branches, but the right sloped downward, rough and rocky. I chose left. Bad call. Less than 30 feet in, the path dead-ended at a shallow ravine, too wide to jump, too steep to climb down. Shit, no. I threw it into reverse just as the pursuing headlights rounded the corner. They were closer now, the grille of the car visible through the trees, an old Crown Vic, matte black, no plates. No way around. I had maybe seconds before they'd be blocking me in. I twisted the wheel hard and yanked the e-brake, the car whipping sideways in a brutal, snapping arc. The front end just missed a tree as I gunned it, speeding back toward the fork. The Crown Vic accelerated, trying to cut me off. I floored it. Our bumpers nearly clipped as I shot past the front of their car, dirt and pine needles spraying into the air. In the rearview, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a shadowed face, no features but the outline of a baseball cap and the unmistakable glint of something metallic in their hand. Gun. I didn't need a second look. I tore down the right-hand path, the Crown Vic right behind me now, no more holding back. The road tilted downward sharply and my car picked up terrifying speed, bouncing over rocks, tires barely gripping the loose earth. Then the world exploded in noise. Bang! The rear windshield shattered, glass raining down on me as I ducked instinctively. The bullet tore through the back seat, lodging somewhere in the trunk. They were shooting now. Another shot rang out, this one pinged off the rear bumper, but it was enough. I spotted a fallen log ahead, thick and moss-covered, lying across the trail. I aimed straight for it. At the last second, I swerved sideways, skimming the edge of the log as my tires slipped in the wet dirt. The Crown Vic wasn't as lucky. It slammed into the log head-on with a sickening crunch of metal. I didn't slow down to see if they were stuck. I just kept driving, deeper into the woods, deeper into nowhere. But a sick, sinking feeling twisted in my gut. There were two cars. I'd only seen one crash. The other was still out there. And they knew I was running blind. The road, if I could still call it that, was barely holding together beneath my tires. Every bump, every jolt felt like it was ripping my car apart from the inside out, but I didn't dare stop. The shattered glass crunched beneath my boots as I shifted my weight, trying to keep control on the uneven terrain. Somewhere behind me, the Crown Vic was either wrecked or stalled, but that didn't matter. It was the first car, the one that had been tailing me on the detour, that I hadn't shaken. I kept the headlights off now. No use broadcasting my position. The moon hung low through the breaks in the trees, casting thin silver ribbons across the path, just enough to make out where the trail curved and where it dropped into ditches. I drove until the trail finally opened into a small clearing, wild grass pushing through cracked asphalt, what looked like the remains of an old service lot. In the center stood a rusted-out shed, its tin roof sagging under years of rot. I killed the engine again, heart pounding so loud it felt like it echoed through the trees. Silence. No tires on gravel. No engines. For a moment, it felt like I'd lost them. But then, a low hum, almost too faint to notice, drifted through the woods. I leaned forward, straining to hear. It wasn't an engine. It was electricity. I followed the faint sound with my eyes until I spotted it, half buried in the grass, an old utility pole with sagging wires still attached, one of them sparking faintly where it had snapped. I didn't know why, but that detail stuck with me. This place wasn't just some random stretch of woods. It had been used for something before. Then, in the distance, a soft crunch of gravel. I ducked low in my seat, peering out over the broken dash. Across the clearing, between the black silhouettes of the trees, a set of headlights flicked on. But they weren't moving toward me. They were just waiting. They knew I was here. The car idled at the tree line, lights steady, no horn, no movement, like it was giving me a choice. Stay in the clearing and wait for them to come, or take my chances on foot. Running seemed suicidal, but staying put felt worse. I made my move. I shoved the door open quietly, glass shards crunching under my boots as I slipped out. The cold air hit me hard, sharpened my lungs. I kept low, skirting the far edge of the clearing, using the rusted shed as cover. The headlights didn't move, but I could hear the car now engine running low, a soft purr beneath the quiet. I ducked behind the shed, the scent of rust and damp would heavy in the air. I risked a glance inside through a jagged hole in the wall. Rusted tools, a toppled workbench, a heavy metal chain hanging from a ceiling beam, and something else. Tire tracks, fresh ones, grooved deep into the dirt floor. This wasn't the first time someone had been lured out here. I didn't have time to think about what that meant. The sound of a door creaking open cut through the stillness. Someone was outside the car now. I peeked around the corner. A figure stood silhouetted in the headlights, tall, broad-shouldered, holding something long and heavy. A crowbar or maybe a tire iron. It caught the light as he swung it casually at his side. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. This was his ground. I backed deeper into the shadows, hands shaking, my mind racing for options. The shed. The chain. It wasn't much, but it was something. I slipped inside, careful not to kick anything loose, and grabbed the chain, the cold metal biting into my palms. I pulled it loose from the beam, the weight of it heavy but manageable. Footsteps crunched outside, getting closer. I crouched behind the workbench as the shed door creaked open, a sliver of light cutting through the dark. The figure stepped inside. I could smell him, sweat, gasoline, something metallic like old blood. His boots scraped against the dirt floor as he moved past the workbench, back turned. I didn't think. I swung. The chain caught him across the back of the knees. He buckled with a grunt, the tire iron clattering from his hand. I was on him before he could recover, wrapping the chain around his neck and yanking back with everything I had. He thrashed, his elbow smashing into my temple hard enough to make stars explode behind my eyes, but I didn't let go. He staggered backward, slamming me into the wall, trying to break my grip. The whole shed rattled with the impact, but the chain held. Another heave, and he collapsed forward, his weight yanking the chain tight before he went still. I shoved him off, gasping for air, blood thudding in my ears. But I didn't have time to catch my breath. Through the hole in the shed wall, I saw it. The first car. It was moving again, and it was headed straight for the clearing. I didn't stop to check if the man I just choked out was still breathing. I didn't care. My focus snapped to the oncoming headlights, bright and steady as they glided across the clearing, cutting through the mist like knives. The car didn't slow. It surged forward with purpose, tires grinding over the cracked asphalt, closing the distance between us. I ducked low and bolted out the back of the shed, boots sinking into damp grass. The chain was still clenched in my fist, heavy, but I kept it. It felt like the only thing standing between me and whatever the hell this was. I cut across the tree line, lungs burning, legs screaming with every step. The forest wasn't forgiving. Low branches clawed at my face, roots snagged at my boots, but adrenaline shoved me forward. Then I heard it, the engine cutting off. No tires skidding, no brakes squealing. Whoever was driving didn't need noise to find me. I ducked behind a thick pine and pressed my back to the bark, heart hammering in my ears. The car door creaked open. Footsteps crunched across the clearing, deliberate, unhurried. A figure appeared between the trees. Not the guy from before. This one was leaner, a hood pulled low over his face. He held something in his hand, dangling by his side. A long, coiled rope. Not a weapon, a tool. He wasn't here to kill me quick. He was here to take me alive. I didn't give him the chance. I sprang from behind the pine, the chain whipping out in a wide arc. Caught him across the shoulder with a meaty crack. But he didn't go down. He staggered, caught his balance, and lashed out with the rope, the heavy metal end of it. Some kind of improvised weight swinging for my head. I ducked too late. It clipped the side of my skull, and white-hot pain exploded through my vision. I hit the ground hard, pine needles jabbing into my palms as I scrambled backward. He was already on me. Boots slammed into my ribs, knocking the air out of my lungs. The chain slipped from my grip as I gasped, vision tunneling, but I forced myself to roll, just in time to avoid the next stomp aimed for my head. I grabbed a broken branch from the ground, swung it blindly, and managed to catch him across the knee. He howled, more rage than pain, and staggered long enough for me to dive forward, slamming my shoulder into his gut. We both went down, a tangle of limbs and mud, but I didn't stop. I clawed at the dirt, pulled myself up, and ran. Not toward the clearing, not back to the cars, deeper into the woods. Branches tore at my face. Mud sucked at my boots. Every breath felt like broken glass in my throat. But I kept running, until I saw it. A break in the trees. Beyond it, a ravine. The same one I'd seen earlier, but farther down where it narrowed into a steep, rocky drop. No way across. No way down without breaking something. But there was a rusted-out metal drainage pipe cutting through the side of the ravine, half buried in dirt and leaves. Just wide enough for me to squeeze into. I didn't think. I slid inside, metal scraping my jacket, the smell of rust and stagnant water thick in my nose. Then, footsteps above. He was at the edge of the ravine. I pressed myself flat, barely breathing. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of wind in the trees. Then, a low chuckle. Won't get far. His voice was calm. Sure. Boots shifted on gravel. Leaves crunched. Then he was gone. Or at least he wanted me to think he was. I stayed still, counting each thud of my heartbeat until the woods went dead silent again. Then I started crawling. The pipe was narrow, jagged with rust, but it angled downward, deeper beneath the earth. Somewhere, anywhere, away from them. But that chuckle echoed in my head. Won't get far. They weren't just chasing me. They were hurting me. The metal pipe was tighter than I thought. Rusted bolts jutted out at odd angles, scraping my jacket as I crawled, and the sharp stench of rot and old rainwater filled the cramped space. My palms slipped against the damp metal, every movement echoing hollowly through the pipe. I kept crawling. The further I went, the colder it got, cold enough that my breath fogged in the dark, the moisture clinging to the walls. I forced myself not to think about what else might be down here, rats, snakes, worse. Behind me, the forest was silent. But that wasn't comforting. If they knew these woods like I thought they did, they'd know exactly where this pipe led. The tunnel sloped downward, the incline steep enough that I started sliding, my boots losing traction. I let it happen, controlling my speed with my hands until the pipe widened and spat me out into blackness. I hit the ground hard, damp dirt, cold and packed tight. I sat there for a second, chest heaving, then scrambled to my feet. The air down here was thick and stale. My eyes adjusted slowly to the low light filtering through cracks above, revealing jagged concrete walls. A storm drain. It had to be part of the old system, forgotten, probably like everything else out here. But it was cover. I followed the tunnel, the sounds of the forest now muffled overhead. Every step echoed, water dripping somewhere deep in the dark. That's when I noticed it. Footprints. Pressed deep into the thin layer of mud, some fresher than others. I wasn't the first person down here. And maybe not the only one now. I kept moving faster now. The tunnel forked in two directions, left sloped upward, maybe back toward the surface, but right. There were more footprints to the right. I should have gone left. I didn't. Something pulled me deeper. The path narrowed again, the walls closing in until I had to hunch as I walked. The air thickened, damp and choking. Then I saw the light. A faint, flickering orange glow ahead, bouncing shadows against the tunnel walls. Fire. I crept forward until the tunnel opened into a wide, hollowed-out chamber. In the center was a steel barrel, flames licking out of its top, the smoke barely rising before the cold damp snuffed it thin. Around it, tools. A folding table, stained and scarred. Ropes. A hacksaw. Knives lined up like someone had been polishing them. And more. Polaroids. Hundreds of them pinned to the walls with rusty nails. I stepped closer, my gut already telling me what I didn't want to see. People. Some in cars. Some in the woods. Some worse. All of them trapped. Just like me. A noise snapped me out of it, a soft metallic clang, like boots hitting the rung of a ladder. I spun, hard in my throat. At the far end of the chamber, a rusted ladder led up into darkness. Someone was climbing down. I didn't wait to see who. I ducked behind a stack of crates, clutching the length of chain still looped around my shoulder. The boots hit the ground heavy. Slow steps. Someone breathing, calm, measured. I risked a glance. The hooded man again. His face was clearer now under the glow of the fire, gaunt, pale, with a ragged scar running from his temple to his jaw. He wasn't carrying the rope anymore. Now he had a hunting knife. He moved slow, checking the room like he knew someone was here but wasn't sure where. I waited until he was 2 steps past me, back exposed. Then I lunged. The chain whipped out, wrapping around his throat before he could spin. I yanked hard, dragging him backward. He clawed at the chain, knife swinging wildly. It caught my arm, a hot, tearing pain, but I didn't loosen my grip. I twisted the chain tighter. His body jerked once. Then he crumpled. I stood there, shaking, blood dripping down my sleeve. But there was no time to slow down. I grabbed the knife and bolted for the ladder, ignoring the screaming ache in my arm. I climbed fast, the cold metal slick with condensation. At the top, a rusted hatch. I shoved it open. Cool night air hit me like a wave. But before I could pull myself fully out, a hand shot down, grabbing my wrist. I looked up. Another face. Not the hooded man. Someone else. I yanked the knife up and drove it into their hand. They screamed, releasing me just long enough for me to scramble out. I didn't look back. I ran. Trees, mud, the night sky overhead. I was out, but I wasn't free. Because somewhere out here, there were more of them. And they weren't done. I tore through the woods, branches whipping against my face, the cut on my arm pulsing hot with every heartbeat. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, but I didn't slow. Somewhere behind me, someone was yelling, muffled curses swallowed by the trees, but I didn't turn around. The moon had dipped lower, its weak light barely filtering through the tangled branches. Every shadow twisted into something worse, hands reaching, figures watching. I kept running. Then I saw it. A break in the trees. Beyond it, an old logging road, narrow, muddy, but wide enough for vehicles. Civilization. Maybe. I scrambled down the embankment, boots sliding through wet leaves, and hit the road hard, nearly losing my footing. That's when I heard it. An engine, low and steady. Headlights snapped on at the far end of the road. They'd cut me off again. I pivoted, ready to bolt the other way. But another set of headlights flared to life behind me. Pinned. The first car crawled forward, slow and deliberate. The second stayed still, blocking my escape. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was a trap. I stumbled into the trees at the side of the road, hoping for cover, but the first car gunned its engine and swerved toward me, tires spraying mud. I dove just in time. The bumper missed my legs by inches, but the force of it sent me sprawling into the underbrush. I scrambled to my feet, heart punching my ribs, and bolted deeper into the woods where the cars couldn't follow. But they didn't need to, because I heard footsteps again, heavy, fast, and close. One of them was on foot now, and they were faster than I was. The footsteps were closing in, pounding hard against the earth, heavy boots crushing twigs and leaves as they cut through the trees behind me. Whoever it was, they weren't wasting energy creeping around this time. I pushed harder, but my legs were failing me. Every muscle burning, lungs straining, the deep gash on my arm oozing warmth that soaked into my sleeve. A flash of metal ahead. I skidded to a halt, almost too late, razor wire stretched low between two trees. I barely jumped it, my boot catching the edge and sending me sprawling face first into the mud. Pain flared sharp through my ribs, but I shoved myself up, just as a shadow burst through the trees behind me. I swung blindly with the knife. The figure ducked, but I caught him across the jaw with the handle, bone cracking under the force. He stumbled back, dropping something heavy, a crowbar, and I didn't hesitate. I grabbed it and swung wide. This time I didn't miss. The metal connected with a sickening crunch, and he dropped hard. I stood over him, chest heaving. He wasn't dead. His chest still rose and fell, shallow and wheezing, but I didn't stick around to finish it. Instead, I rifled through his jacket. Keys. A key fob worn and cracked. One of the cars. I bolted back toward the logging road, leaves snagging at my boots. The key fob clenched tight in my fist. I broke through the tree line. Both cars were still there. The one that had tried to run me down sat idling, the other dark. I hit the button on the fob. The dark car's lights blinked. I sprinted. The driver of the idling car must have noticed because the engine roared, headlights flaring brighter as it lunged forward. I dove for the door of the dark car, yanked it open, and slid inside just as the other car slammed to a stop a few feet away, its tires skidding in the mud. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, then roared to life. I didn't give the other driver a chance. I floored it. Mud sprayed behind me as I shot down the logging road, tires barely gripping the slick ground. In the rear view, headlights snapped on again. They weren't letting me go that easy, but now I had the upper hand, and I wasn't running anymore. The tires spat mud as I tore down the logging road, the stolen car rattling with every jolt and dip. Behind me, headlights surged through the trees, bouncing wildly as the other car tried to close the gap. I gripped the wheel tighter, blood still slick on my palm, the gash on my arm throbbing in time with my heartbeat. But I didn't care. I was so damn close. The road curved sharply to the left, and for a moment I considered yanking the wheel hard, force the car off the path and into the trees, maybe lose them for good. But then I saw it. A tall chain-link fence, partially obscured by overgrowth, running parallel to the road. Beyond it, the flicker of distant highway lights. Civilization. A break in the fence, twisted metal wide enough for the car to squeeze through. Freedom. I slammed the gas. The car lurched forward, tires screaming as I gunned it through the gap, branches clawing at the sides as I burst out onto a flat, open stretch of land. The highway loomed just ahead, glowing lights, the faint sound of trucks in the distance. But something felt wrong. The ground beneath the tires changed, mud giving way to gravel, then to something more solid but uneven. Rows of metal stakes lined the edges of the clearing, half buried in tall grass. I wasn't on a back road. I was in a junkyard. A massive one. Piles of rusted cars loomed like grave markers, twisted frames stacked high, their shattered windows reflecting my headlights like hollow eyes. And then I saw them. More cars. Not parked. Waiting. Engines idling low. Their headlights snapped on 3, 4, 5 sets all at once. It wasn't just the two I'd been running from. It was bigger. A network. They'd been guiding me here the whole time. The radio in my stolen car crackled to life, static hissing before a voice cut through, low, calm, almost amused. You really thought you were getting out? Panic flared hot in my chest as I yanked the wheel, trying to turn back toward the gap I'd come through, but two of the cars slid into place, blocking it off. I was caged in. Engines revved, headlights blinding. They weren't chasing anymore. They were circling. The voice came through the radio again. You were never supposed to make it this far. Then, the cars lunged forward. I threw the stolen car into reverse, fishtailing between rusted wrecks as metal screamed around me. One of the pursuing cars clipped my rear bumper, sending me spinning sideways. I slammed the brakes. And that's when I saw it. A ramp of crushed cars stacked high against the outer fence. An insane idea sparked. I floored it. The car bucked as it hit the makeshift ramp, metal screeching under the tires. I barely cleared the top row, then I was airborne, the car lurching before it slammed down hard on the other side, tires exploding on impact. But I was through. Smoke filled the cabin. I kicked the door open and stumbled out, gasping, ears ringing. In the distance, highway lights, closer now. But as I staggered forward, I heard it again. Engines. They weren't done yet. And this time I realized something worse. They didn't care if I made it out. They wanted me to. Because whatever this was, whatever I'd been dragged into, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I limped toward the highway, every muscle screaming, blood soaking through my torn jacket. The wrecked car behind me hissed steam into the cold night air, the smell of burning oil thick in my throat. But I didn't stop. The highway was right there, just a shallow ditch and a thin guardrail between me and the blinking lights of passing trucks. I scrambled up the embankment, boots slipping in loose gravel, the distant roar of engines still chasing me through the trees. I vaulted over the guardrail just as a semi-thundered past, its headlights stretching long shadows across the empty stretch of road. For the first time all night, I thought I'd actually made it. But then, I heard it. A soft click. I turned my head slow, dread coiling tight in my gut. Mounted on a rusted utility pole above me. A camera. Its tiny red light blinked. Not a traffic cam. Older. Private. Pointed straight at me. And then I realized. This wasn't random. The detour. The traps. The junkyard. It was staged. I'd been watched the whole time. My hands curled into fists, breath fogging in the cold air. A low hum filled the air. I turned. Two black SUVs crawled onto the highway from a side road, hazard lights flashing but no police markings. They stopped a few feet away. Doors opened. 3 men stepped out, no masks this time. Faces sharp and clean, clothes too plain, like they didn't want to be remembered. One of them, older, tall, a scar cutting through his eyebrow, nodded at me. Hell of a run, he said, almost like he was impressed. I didn't answer. Couldn't. He stepped closer, pulling something from his jacket, a plain black envelope. He tossed it onto the ground at my feet. Most don't make it this far, he said. You did. I didn't move. He tilted his head. Consider it an invitation. Then he turned, walked back to the SUV, and the 3 of them drove off, leaving me standing alone on the highway, the envelope still sitting there like a loaded gun. I didn't pick it up. Not at first. But curiosity's a poison. I did eventually. Inside was a single card. No names. No address. Just 4 words printed in clean, bold letters. Next time you hunt.